U.S. President Donald Trump has secured a major political victory after Congress narrowly passed his flagship tax and spending bill, cementing his second-term agenda and boosting funds for his anti-immigration drive. But the legislation does not come without political risk, as it adds trillions to the U.S. deficit.
Republican leaders cajoled, bullied and flattered party rebels to back Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill through Congress. The president's sweeping legislation on tax and spending will add trillions to the national debt and gut healthcare and food programs. 6 months into Trump's second term, it marks his biggest political triumph to date. The US president was jubilant after it was passed.
We're sort of celebrating like the biggest bill of its kind ever signed, and it's going to make this country into a rocket ship. It's going to be really great.
The bill includes $4.5 trillion in tax cuts and adds new tax breaks on tips and overtime. It also provides hundreds of billions of dollars for border security and the military. The plan will be partially paid for by cutting healthcare and food assistance. It also phases out tax incentives for green energy. But the bill could come at a political cost. Democrats have attacked the Republicans for turning their backs on middle-class and low-income households. Some analysts believe that it could harm the grand old party, as it sets the political battle lines ahead of next year's midterm elections.
I think Democrats are going to adopt a bit of a populist message themselves, saying that Republicans are extending taxes and giving new taxes to the wealthiest Americans while hurting the medical benefits for poorer Americans. And so I think that is a political tactic that is likely to be successful for Democrats.
Democrats warned of the widespread impact it will have on the economy.
We'll see what happens with inflation. We'll see what happens with home ownership, job starts. If cutting $1 trillion out of Medicaid is what we call progress, I'd like to see what failure is.
The passage of the bill came as the US economy added 147,000 jobs in June, a higher figure than expected, which shows the labour market is shrugging off the impact of Trump's trade tariffs. The president is set to sign the bill into law on Friday afternoon in Washington, meeting his self-imposed deadline of the 4th of July.
Well, for more on this, we're joined here in the studio by DW reporter Steven Beardsley. So, Steven, President Trump has got his big bill through Congress. He's going to sign it today on Independence Day. How much of a win is this for the president?
All right, Terry, it's a huge political win. We talked about at the beginning of this term how narrow these congressional majorities were for his party. And we talked about the fact that that would require some sort of movement on key legislation from him. He was going to have to meet these congressmen and congresswomen on their terms a little bit more just to secure passage of signature legislation. This is a signature piece of legislation, and he managed to get it through without really having to move too much from his own view. And he got the visuals that he wants on Independence Day. So the timeline that he wanted, he sped it up, it went through, and that really shows the kind of grip that he has on this party and the grip that the MAGA movement has on the Republicans right now, especially when you look at these very conservative supposed holdouts in the House. They were it was the last chamber that passed this bill. As it came back from the Senate, it was far more expensive than it was when it left the House. They had put up their hands and said, we're not going to deal with this if it comes back looking like this. As soon as it came back, apparently they had conversations with Trump, and they relented. They all signed up for it and said, we will pass it. The thing is, we don't know exactly what those agreements were. Apparently there was, talk of executive orders, something to sort of relieve their concerns, but that they didn't want it in writing in the bill is very different from how we've experienced this in the past. So it really shows how much power this individual has over the party.
Donald Trump has described this bill as a rocket ship for the economy, but what will it actually deliver, Steve?
Yeah, I think that's a bit too far. I mean, this is not a stimulus package, right? This is not what we saw with what Biden passed after or during the pandemic, I should say, which was really meant to stimulate the economy and get things going after this kind of incredible, fall from the pandemic. The most expensive part of this is extending tax cuts that were already in place. So what it does is it adds some spending on top of that, which means that the baseline growth was going to continue, but then there's going to be some on top of this. It's just that it's very expensive. And that's what's overshadowing all of this. $3.4 trillion in new debt over 10 years is the current estimate for the cost of this. Now, there are signs that some of these measures could promote growth, manufacturing in the midterm to long term. Businesses will be encouraged to write off more, to invest more. That's a good thing. But a big criticism, and one that's understandable, is that it really prefers older industries to newer ones. For example, taking away tax credits for building out renewable energies, taking away subsidies for electric vehicles, giving more to fossil fuels. So in terms of global competition, the U.S. seems to be pulling back from an area where actually it stood to do very well. And that's I think, a very understandable criticism of this bill.
Now, the bill is controversial for all sorts of reasons. Is it likely to have an impact, Stephen, on midterm elections coming up next year?
Yeah, obviously, this is what Democrats are going to run with. We saw that in the piece as well. It is a very simple read for them. You know, Trump basically decreased taxes for the wealthiest households across the U.S., and he did that at the cost of taking health insurance from more poor people. We know that they're going to get kicked off the rolls. That is what this is designed to do and how they're going to save money through this. And we know that this is a bill in which the affluent gain much, much more from tax cuts. It is a regressive tax policy. More is going to be spent on defense, more is going to be spent on border, but at the cost of a huge, huge rise in debt. This is a very easily sold political discussion, I think, from the Democrats, and they're going to run hard with it in the midterms.
Stephen, thank you very much. DW reporter Stephen Beardsley.